think the objection should be sustained, but just rephrase the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Tobin, as you prepare to tell us why these results, in your opinion, are not reliable, could you please help the jury to understand something about oxygen saturation testing in the blood?
Right. So if you have, like was done in Mr. Floyd, when he went to Henneman County, he had an arterial blood gas obtained. So that's sticking a needle into the artery at the wrist, and you take out the blood. And then on the blood gas measurements, you measure a number of different items on that, like the pressure of oxygen in the blood, the pressure of carbon dioxide, the amount of acid in the blood, called the pH, and you get all these different measurements, and you also get the oxygen saturation, and that is the how much of the hemoglobin, the protein in the blood that carries the oxygen, how much of that hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. And we know in Mr. Floyd that it was 98% saturated.
So 98% saturated with oxygen?
With oxygen when they measured it in Henneman County. And that was 9/16, the time frame.
So if we know that there's an oxygen saturation of 98%, does that tell us anything whatsoever?
Yes,
about what?
I'm sorry, I interrupt. I apologize.
Does that tell us anything whatsoever about what the carbon monoxide content could have been at a maximum?
Yes, it does. It tells us that if the hemoglobin is saturated at 98%, it tells you all there was for everything else is 2%, and so the maximum amount of carbon monoxide would be 2%. It tells you the maximum amount of carboxyhemoglobin. That was what was mentioned yesterday. The maximum amount is 2%. It doesn't even tell you that it is 2%. It could be something else. But 2% of carboxyhemoglobin is within the normal range. You and I have levels of carboxyhemoglobin of somewhere between 0 and 3.
And so in other words, as to the statement that his carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18%, in your view, that's not possible.
It's simply wrong.
And it was at most 2%.
At most 2%.
Normal.
Which is normal.
New subject to discuss with you. You might recall, if you were listening to the testimony, my discussing with Dr. Fowler the hypopharynx.
Yes, I remember.
And you might recall I spent some time asking him about what research he had done on the potential for pressure on the back to narrow the hypopharynx.
Yeah, I recall that.
Do you recall him saying he had canvassed the literature and he could not find anything?
I'm sorry?
Do you recall him saying he had reviewed the research and that he could not find anything?
Yes, I recall him saying that.
Are you able to enlighten or give any information to the jury on the nature of the research on the hypopharynx and how it narrows with compression in the prone position?
Yeah. So, the research on this, which is extensive, is really in the scientific literature. It's in the physiological literature. And then that is applied over to clinical medicine. So the type of studies that are done are not really done in terms of ordinary clinical research. It's much more a physiological, much more scientific of how the body works. And there's about probably at least a dozen, maybe 20 studies that show the relationship between how that if you lower the size of the lungs, you must get a decrease in the size of the hypopharynx. All of the studies show that.
And then are there studies then that look at whether the pressure on the neck narrows the hypopharynx?
No. Because when we do research, we try and do research on studies that might be puzzling, that you would be kind of expecting a bit of a surprise. If you think about sticking your fingers into your neck, you know you're going to narrow the hypopharynx. That's not kind of research that somebody is going to want to do. It's so common sense that you would know that that's going to happen. I mean, you can do it on yourself if you want. And as soon as you put pressure here, you can immediately sense that your upper airway is narrowing.
Dr. Tobin, that is all we wanted to clarify with you this morning.
Okay.
If I may have 2 minutes.
Sure. Let's do a stretch break in place. There's the jury. We're going to actually have a recess now until 1:45, so we'll reconvene at that time.